guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we want to look at how to understand medical terminologies, no matter how complex they look. Once you understand that medicine is not just science, but also involves linguistics or language, the studies become easy because you don't need to memorize everything. My name is Dr. Obeng Frimpong, your TutorMed. And so guys, we need to understand that most medical terms are compound words and are usually made up of the prefix, the root words, plus the suffixes, although they don't always follow this three-component format. Now, as an example, let's look at the word hypertrichosis. It may sound complex, but a breakdown of the word shows that it comes from the prefix hyper, which means excessive or high, and the root word trich, which means hair, and a suffix osis, which signifies a condition. And so hypertrichosis would mean a condition characterized by excessive hair. Like I said, they do not always follow the three-component pattern. I mean the prefix plus the root word plus the suffix pattern. Sometimes you can have just the root word plus a suffix. An example is the word craniotomy. Cranio is the root word meaning skull, and tomy is a suffix meaning a surgical incision. And so craniotomy means making a surgical incision on the skull. At other times, you have a prefix plus a suffix. An example is hyperemia. Hyper, as we saw, means excessive, and emia is a suffix related to blood. And so hyperemia would mean an excess of blood. Then we can have a prefix plus a root word. An example here will be the word mesencephalon or encephalon. Mes is a prefix meaning middle, and encephalon or encephalon is a root word related to the brain. And so when we study embryology, you would realize that mesencephalon is the embryological structure from which the midbrain develops. So mesencephalon is the embryological midbrain. And so folks, in this particular video, we are going to pay attention to some lists of prefixes and their meaning, and then relate it to some words. We can't go through all the prefixes in medicine, but we will take a look at a few. The first is a or an. The prefix a or an, which means lack of something or without something. And so in words like anemia, emia, like we saw, is a suffix related to blood, and so anemia is either lack of blood or without blood. Then another example here is chalasia. Chalasia means esophageal sphincter relaxation, and so when we say achalasia, we mean a condition that is characterized by, or we say it means without esophageal sphincter relaxation. So you know achalasia is a condition which causes dysphagia and is as a result of the inability of the lower esophageal sphincter to relax. The next prefix we want to talk about is ab, which means away from something. And so in words like aboral, when we describe a structure as aboral, we mean it is away from the mouth. So for example, when we say the anus is aboral, it means it is situated away from the mouth. Another word we can coin from the prefix ab is abduction. Now duction, the word duction has to do with movement of the eyeball, but it can also be related to movement of any part of the body. And so when we say abduction, it means away from the midline. So we have the abductors. When we say muscles are abductors, it means that they move a certain part of the body away from the midline. Abduction. The next prefix is ad, and it is the opposite of ab. So if ab means away from something, then ad would mean near something or towards something. And so some words here include adrenal. When we say adrenal, it means near the kidney, and so the adrenal gland is near the kidney. When we say adduction, adduction, it means we are moving towards the midline. So when we say that the pectoralis major adducts the arm, we mean that it moves the arm towards the midline. Then the next prefix is allo. Allo means something different but of the same species. For example, the term allograft means that you have a graft or a structure from another individual. It means it's different, that individual is different, but that individual is of the same species. So when we say that you are transferring an allograft, you are transferring a different tissue from an individual of the same species. Then the next the next prefix I want to talk about is bi, bi, and this is very common. It means two or both. And so the word biventricular, when we say biventricular, we mean both ventricles or the two ventricles. And so you hear this word applied in heart failure, biventricular failure. We mean that two of the ventricles, the left and then the right, have failed. Then we have dis. Dis meaning difficult, or in some situations may mean painful. And so when we say dysphasia, phasia is a root word for language. And so when we say dysphasia, we mean difficulty in speaking. Then we have another example, dysphagia. Phagia deals with eating or swallowing, and so dysphagia would be difficulty swallowing. Another example, when we say dysmenorrhea, unfortunately, this does not mean difficulty in menstruation. It means painful menstruation. And so please remember that this can be difficult or painful. And so in this sense, dysmenorrhea means painful menstruation. Now you may ask that why is it that dysphagia doesn't mean painful swallowing? No, that is not so. In actual fact, the correct term for painful swallowing is odynophagia. And so to every rule, you know that there are exceptions. The next prefix we want to talk about is ecto, also very common. It means outside or outermost. And so when we say ectoderm, we mean the outermost germ layer. Although the derm there literally means skin, but in embryology, when we say ectoderm, we mean the outermost germ layer. So we have epi. Epi means upon or exterior to something. So when we say epidermis, we are talking about the structure above the dermis of the skin. And so the structure above the dermis of the skin, you know, is epidermis. Then we come to the prefix hyper. We've seen this already. It means excessive, high, or above. And so when we talk of hyperglycemia, you know that glycemia, the root word gly means sugar, emia means blood. So hyperglycemia would mean high blood sugar. Then its opposite is hypo. If hyper means excessive or above, then hypo would mean beneath or below. So when we talk of hyponatremia, the term natri has to do with sodium, emia has to do with blood, and so hyponatremia would mean low blood sodium. Good. And so we move to inter. Inter means between, and so we have words like intercostal, which would mean between the ribs, because the root word costal means ribs. So we can have things like intercostal nerve, intercostal artery. We mean the nerve and the artery respectively that are between the ribs. Then the next thing is intra. Intra means within or inside. And so when we talk of intracellular, we mean within cells. So for example, potassium is an intracellular ion. It means that potassium is an ion which is within cells. The next, para. para means near or beside, similar to at, like we saw earlier. And so words like parathyroid means near the thyroid. And so we know that parathyroid glands are near the thyroid. Quickly, let's move to the word or the prefix peri. Now, peri means around something. And so words like periosteum. Osteum is the root word for bone. And so periosteum is the structure around the bone. Periosteum. Then we have pre. Pre means before. And so the word prenatal. Natal has to do with birth. And so prenatal means before birth. Then we have the prefix post. Post means after. And so when you hear a word like postnatal, it means after birth. Then we have the prefix sub. Sub means below something. And so words like submandibular means below the mandible. Subclavian. Clavian has to do, or clavi has to do with the clavicle. So subclavian means that the structure is below the clavicle. So when we see the subclavian artery, we mean that the artery that runs underneath or below the clavicle. Then we have the prefix supra. Supra means above. And so when you hear of supraclavicular, it means that this structure runs above the clavicle. If you hear of suprarenal, it means that whatever the structure is on top or above the kidneys. That is why the adrenal gland is sometimes known as the suprarenal gland. Then we have infra. Infra, just like sub, would mean below. If supra is above, infra would be below. And so words like infraorbital means that this nerve runs below the orbit of the eye. So we have the infraorbital nerve, a nerve that runs below the orbit of the eye. Now we move to the prefix brady. Brady means slow. And so when you hear of words like bradycardia, cardia has to do with the heart. And so bradycardia would mean a slow heart rate. Bradypnea would mean a slow respiratory rate, because the word pnea has to do with breathing. So slow breathing, bradypnea. Then its opposite would be tachy. Tachy would mean fast. And so tachycardia would mean a fast heart rate, and tachypnea would mean a fast respiratory rate. Then you have you. It would mean true or normal. And so words like euthyroid would mean that the patient has a normal thyroid hormone level. Euthyroid. If a patient is described as euthyroid, it means that he has a normal thyroid. On this slide, we want to look at a couple of more prefixes. And so new means new. And so words like neoplasia, the root word plasia means growth. And so neoplasia would mean new growth. And that is typical for cancerous cells. Then we have nulli. Nulli comes from the Latin or the word null, which means none. So when we say nulliparity, as you know already, parity in obstetrics and gynecology means delivery of viable pregnancies, or having deliveries beyond the gestational age of viability. So nulliparity is used to describe a woman who has never delivered a baby beyond the gestational age of viability. Then we have pan. Pan means all. And so when we say pancytopenia, cyto, or the root word cyte, means cell. Penia would mean poverty or lack of. So when we say pancytopenia, we mean that the patient's blood lacks all nature of red blood cells, including the red blood cell, white blood cell, the platelets. Then we come to the prefix poly. Poly means many or much or too much. So polyuria. Uria has to do with urination. And so polyuria would mean increased urination. Then we have hemi, which means half. And so the word hemiplegia. Plegia in neurology has to do with paralysis, complete paralysis of a nerve. of a muscle. And so hemiplegia means half of the body is completely paralyzed. Then we have xero. Xero means dry. And so the word xerostomia. Stomia, the root word, means mouth. So xerostomia would mean dry mouth. Let's have a look at more. We have the prefix per. Per means through. And so when we say that a procedure is done percutaneously, percutaneous means through the skin. The next is juxta, which means near. So when we say, for example, a cell is juxtaglomerular, we mean that cell is near or near to the glomerulus. Then we have retro, which means at the back or behind. So when you hear retroperitoneum, we mean, or if a structure is described, like the kidney is described as retroperitoneum, we mean it is behind the peritoneum. Then we have quadri, which means four. So quadriparesis. Again, paresis in neurology means partial paralysis of the muscles. So quadriparesis would mean partial paralysis of all the limbs. So both upper limbs and then lower limbs. Then we have trans, which means across. So when you hear of transthoracic, it means across the thorax. So for example, let's do a transthoracic echo or transabdominal ultrasound. It means that let's go across, let's scan the heart for an echo across the chest, and transabdominal means let's scan the abdomen across the abdomen, as it were, transabdominal scan. Then we have pachy. Pachy means thick, and so pachy meninges, for example, we are describing the meningeal layers which are thick, like the dura mater, for example. And so this is the end of some of the prefixes used in medicine. We didn't go through all because there were a lot. I wanted to go through this, and so thank you for watching this video. Kindly do not forget to like and share this video, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell, and thank you for doing just that. See you in our next video, and until then, arrivederci. Bye.